When I was 19, I often stayed home alone at my parents' house. Our house was located near a small pond just behind the backyard, with a small town park on the other side of the pond. The area was pretty high-end, with large properties and fancy homes. Because the houses were so far apart, neighbors rarely crossed paths. At that time, I was still in college, though I've since moved out on my own. My parents were well off and often away, leaving me home alone. This happened one summer evening while I was on break from school. I don't recall which day of the week it was, but I imagine it was just a random day since I was home. I was sitting in the sunroom at the back of the house, where I loved to sit during the summer, because it was always cool and pleasant with all the windows open. I was relaxing on the couch near the corner window, watching my favorite show, when I heard the sound of splashing water from the direction of the pond. At first, I thought it was the usual ducks or geese that often fought and made noise. I tried to ignore it, but the sound persisted, forcing me to lower the volume on the TV to listen more carefully. As I pressed my ear closer to the window, I realized that the splashing was steady and much louder than any bird. It sounded like someone was swimming. I decided to step outside and check. From the dark backyard, I could hear the humming of a man's voice along with the splashing. It seemed like someone was trespassing near our property. I went back inside to turn on the backyard lights. The light only illuminated a small part of the pond, and immediately the strange noise stopped. Clearly, the person had noticed me. I thought it might be one of the neighbors, but swimming in the pond was odd. Whoever it was, I didn't want to confront them. I turned off the light, locked the door, and texted my brother, who was away at college, but he didn't reply right away. I tried to stay calm, but after that, I couldn't focus on the TV anymore. All I could see through the window was the thick darkness. Then I heard something directly on the porch. Quickly turned off the TV, plunging the room into darkness, and that's when I heard the heavy breathing outside one of the windows. My heart raced as I tried to lie still on the couch, hoping not to be noticed. After a few moments, a deep, raspy voice from outside the window said, "I see you." It felt like my heart dropped to my stomach. Not knowing what else to do, I blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was the name of one of our neighbors, and I hoped it was just him playing a prank. But there was no response. Only the quiet sound of footsteps moving away. After a few minutes of lying still, I got up to check the locks on the doors. Everything was securely locked. I texted my family to tell them what had happened. My dad told me to turn on the outside lights and check the area. I followed his advice, looking out into the yard but not seeing anything, except for faint, wet footprints fading on the ground. I traced the footprints and suddenly saw the top of a man's head peeking out from the edge of the porch, his eyes staring right at me. As soon as he saw me, he quickly turned away. At that moment, I immediately called 911. Police arrived and searched the area but found nothing else. They asked if my family had any issues with anyone, but we didn't have any known enemies. That night, I locked all the windows and turned on the air conditioning, feeling a little safer. The next morning, I was relieved to see daylight. The man never came back, and to this day, we still don't know who he was. When I was 19, I lived at home with my parents, and I had a dog that I would walk 3 times a day: morning, afternoon, and finally, late at night. The last walk of the day was always pretty late, and this had never been an issue until one night. On that final walk, I set off as usual, following my typical route out of the driveway and into the circular parking lot of the apartment complex where we live. This sets the scene for what I'm about to tell you. I always walked pretty late at night, and I'm not sure why, but it had become a routine since getting my dog, and I'd never encountered a problem until that night. I started the final walk of the day, sticking to my usual path. I had a flashlight with me since the parking lot was unlit, and I was also listening to music with one earbud in, thinking it would help me stay alert if I heard anything unusual. And then I did. As I neared the parking lot, I heard a noise, a voice from up ahead, but I was too absorbed in my music at first to pay much attention. Then something snapped me out of it, and I stopped. I took my earbud out and stood still, listening, trying to figure out if I had just imagined it. And then it happened again. Voice came from up ahead, but I couldn't see anyone. So stupidly, I kept walking, cautiously this time, thinking it must be my imagination. But something felt off. I stopped after taking a few more steps, right next to where the cars were parked, and I shone my flashlight ahead to get a better look. I stood there, listening. Then the strangest thing happened. A voice, choked and childlike, called out from up ahead, saying, "Help me." My heart sank instantly and my legs felt frozen. I fumbled with my flashlight, shining it everywhere to locate the source of the voice. I was certain it was coming from the cars, but I couldn't see a child or anyone else nearby. It was just me and my dog, who didn't seem to notice anything and was busy sniffing around the bushes. Then I heard it again. Plea for help. "Help me," echoed 3 more times, coming from the left, where the cars were parked. It only made me panic more. I didn't know what to think, but I knew I wasn't imagining it because my dog's ears perked up, and it too started looking in the same direction I was facing after the voice spoke. That's when I realized how chillingly strange the situation was. After hearing it several times, I noticed that the voice didn't quite sound like a child's. Can't explain exactly how, but it felt like a mix between an adult and a child's voice at the same time. And every time the call for help came, was choked, almost like it was muffled, and it wasn't said with urgency like you'd expect in a real emergency. I could tell because there was no change in tone, no rise or fall in the sound. It was flat, almost mechanical. My dog and I ran straight home after that. I tried to explain everything to my mom, and she was just as confused as I was. I suggested calling the police in case someone actually needed help, but my mom didn't think it was necessary. So many questions swirled in my mind. Why was the voice choked like that? Was there someone in one of the cars that I couldn't see? Or was it something darker, waiting for me to get closer? I try not to dwell on it too much, but whatever it was, it still makes me feel deeply uneasy to this day. This photo shows the spot where I stopped and took my earbud out to listen. I heard the voice coming from up ahead, to the left. This is where I walked closer and heard it again from my left side. I know there's an apartment complex to the right, and some people might think the noise came from there, but it definitely came from the direction of the cars where my dog and I both heard it. From this angle, there's nothing to suggest the sound was coming from anywhere else. At that time, all the parked vehicles were trucks and SUVs, which were pretty big and blocked a lot of the area, making it hard for me to see clearly from where I was standing. I never did find out the truth of what happened that night. Before we dive into the next story, if you're here for the first time, let me know where you're tuning in from. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of the upcoming scary stories. We appreciate your support. Feel free to share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. This happened when I was a child, living in our old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. I was around 5 or 6 years old. My older brother James and I shared a bedroom upstairs. It used to be a small apartment that my dad rented out to an elderly lady. After she moved out, the upstairs became our space. The layout of the upstairs was pretty simple. Up the stairs and to the left was the bedroom that James and I shared, which had previously been the woman's living room. Straight ahead was the bathroom, and to the right was a small kitchen and a smaller bedroom. We had plenty of toys in our room since it was quite spacious. There were also 2 built-in closets on opposite walls where we stored our toys and games. Among those toys was a racing car toy with multiple buttons. When pressed, it would make sounds like honking, engine noises, driving sounds, and even play a short rock song. It had been around for a while. Gift to James when he was younger. One night, as we were lying in bed but not yet asleep, the car suddenly lit up and made loud noises, flashing lights and all, just like a scene from a horror movie. I was terrified and immediately accused James of turning it on to scare me. Just laughed and insisted he didn't do anything. After a moment, the car stopped and the room fell silent again. Although I was shaken, I eventually forgot about it and fell asleep. That didn't happen again right away. But another night, as we were once again lying in bed, we heard a strange noise, like a soft tapping sound in the room. James tried to scare me by saying it was a ghost, which made me yell at him to stop or I'd call Mom. Kept laughing until we both saw a flash of light in the corner of the room. The toy car had turned itself on again. This time, I was so scared that I jumped out of bed and ran down the stairs, screaming for my mom as I went. I burst into my parents' room, yelling that something was happening in our room. James followed behind me, and my mom quickly scolded him for trying to scare me. He protested, saying there was no way he could have turned on the car from his bed. Mom let me sleep in their room that night because I was too afraid to go back upstairs. Things stayed quiet for a while after that, until another night. This time, James wasn't home. I think he was sleeping over at a friend's house. I was in the room alone, feeling uneasy. I had long since stashed the toy car in the small room across the hall because it creeped me out. Mom kissed me goodnight, and I asked her to leave the door open because I didn't like being alone. As I lay there trying to fall asleep, a sense of anxiety kept me awake. That night, I felt strangely alert. Suddenly, I heard an odd noise from down the hall. When I looked, I saw the toy car rolling into my room, its lights flashing and engine noises blaring. I screamed in terror, my heart pounding. I burst into tears and pressed myself against the wall, shouting for my mom. Within seconds, both my parents came running up the stairs and into the room. They saw the toy car sitting in the middle of the floor, lights still flashing. I was sobbing, telling them that someone had pushed the car into my room. My dad checked the other rooms but found no sign of anyone. There was nowhere to hide upstairs, except the closets and under the bed, and he checked both thoroughly. I don't know what my parents thought at that moment. Maybe they believed the car was faulty, or that my imagination was running wild. But I could see the worry in their eyes too. Toy car didn't have any feature that allowed it to move on its own. Ease my mind, my dad took the toy car, smashed it, and threw it in the neighbor's trash bin. After that night, I slept in my parents' room for a while, until Dad decided it was time for me to go back to my own room. Although I eventually did return to my room, I never forgot that terrifying experience. This story is why I believe in the possibility of a supernatural world where things beyond explanation can still exist. I'm not someone who usually has sleep problems like sleep paralysis or nightmares. Normally I sleep very deeply, so when this happened, it was a real shock. We all have nightmares from time to time. I've always thought of them as free horror movies that play in my sleep. It might sound crazy, but sometimes I even enjoy the thrill of waking up after one of those intense dreams. Back then, I was living with my roommate, Patricia, or Trish, as I called her. We had different work schedules, so we rarely saw each other except on weekends. This happened in July, during a stretch of unbearable summer heat. I always kept the air conditioner running throughout the night, both to cool the room and to create white noise that helped me sleep. First night I had a nightmare was not long after I'd broken up with my ex-boyfriend. Life felt pretty unstable at that point. Dream itself was hazy, but I remember sitting in a crowded room with family members, all sitting silently around a dinner table. On the other side of the table stood this strange creature, something like the aliens from the movie Signs, except it had horns and claws. It resembled a demon you'd see in sleep paralysis, but I was definitely asleep at the time. The next thing I recall is that the creature was suddenly standing right beside me, staring at me. I started running and suddenly found myself in my own bedroom, or at least a version of it. That's the last thing I remember before I woke up. The room was pitch black, the air conditioner was humming, and my heart was racing from the nightmare. I told myself, wow, that was a real horror dream, and then went back to sleep. Next night, I woke up in the middle of the night and found my bedroom door wide open. This was odd because I always shut it before going to bed, unless I'd had a bit to drink. Thinking maybe Trish had checked on me, I got up, closed the door, and went back to bed. The next morning, I asked Trish if she had come into my room, but she said no. I figured maybe I'd gotten up to use the bathroom and forgotten about it. The following night, things got even weirder. This time, I dreamed about the demon creature again, but there was no family, no dinner table. Instead, I was standing in a dark, square room, just me and the creature. It kept getting closer, even though I couldn't actually see it moving. Eventually, it was standing right over me, and I felt paralyzed, unable to move. It raised its sharp claws and slashed my thigh. The pain in the dream felt so real. I woke up with a start, and my thigh still hurt like the scratch had actually happened. When I touched it, I found a long scratch on my skin. Panicked, I rushed to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and screamed when I saw the mark. I ran straight to Trish's room and woke her up. Trish, half asleep, asked what was wrong, and I pointed to the scratch on my thigh. We went back to my room, pulled the blankets off my bed, searching for anything sharp, though I knew it didn't make sense. Suddenly, Trish signaled me to be quiet and turned off the air conditioner. In the dead silence that followed, we heard a faint noise coming from under the bed, like someone was there. We both stared at each other, terrified, and then bolted out of the room without saying a word. We ran to the neighbor's house, an older man, and asked to use his phone to call the police. While we were waiting for them to arrive, we heard the sound of a door slamming from my house. Someone had left, but neither of us had the courage to look and see who it was. When the police arrived, they confirmed that the intruder had already fled. They mentioned that the lights we turned on as we escaped probably alerted the person that they had been caught. After the police left, I couldn't stop thinking about the connection between the dream and reality. The demon from my nightmare could have been the same person who had broken into my home. Maybe that first night, when the door was open, the intruder had been quietly wandering around my house, watching me, and the fact that the scratch from the dream appeared on my leg made my skin crawl. Since then, I've come to see dreams and nightmares in an entirely new light. I've been a daily smoker for years. Before you judge me, let me just say that I've recently started seeing a therapist to help me quit nicotine. Unfortunately, it hasn't been very effective. Worse than my smoking habit is my erratic sleep schedule. I stay up late, sometimes until the early morning, and rarely wake up before noon. While I'm working on changing these habits, both of them led to a series of strange events I'm about to share. It all started a few months ago. I was standing on my balcony, smoking a cigarette, as I do every night. The area I live in is pretty quiet, not like the kind of neighborhoods where the houses are close together. From my balcony, though, I can see over the fence into my neighbor's yard. I've never met the guy, but I've always assumed he lived alone, since there was only ever a blue BMW parked in the driveway. But that night, I noticed something different. A black van was parked in front of his house. I didn't think much of it at the time, just made a mental note. The next night, I paid more attention and saw that the black van was still parked in the same spot. Curiosity started to build up inside me. By the next morning, the van was gone. For the rest of that week, I turned the van into a game for myself, guessing why it was there or what it was being used for. I told myself I wasn't too curious, but the truth is, I've always had this obsessive tendency to fixate on odd detail. Trait that's pushed a few friends away over the years. I wasn't planning to do more than just observe, until one night, everything changed. I was up later than usual, maybe around 5 a.m. The van was still there, like it had been the nights before. While I was smoking, my neighbor suddenly walked out, carrying a long black bag, which looked pretty heavy. He slid open the van door and carefully placed the bag inside, then drove off. The whole thing left me confused. What could he possibly be carrying in that bag? The next morning, I went out to the balcony earlier than usual, hoping to catch sight of the van again. Around 1 a.m., it appeared. I sat and watched closely, and after a few minutes, my neighbor came out, opened the van door, and pulled out the long bag. This time, he seemed to struggle with it more, like it was heavier. He slowly carried it back inside his house, and I couldn't stop thinking about how weird this was. Following night, I decided to follow the van. At around 4 a.m., when I saw the van pull out, quickly ran downstairs, got into my car, turned off my headlights, and waited until the van turned onto the main road before trailing behind it. After about 20 minutes, the van turned onto a dirt road that led into a sparse forest. The road looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years. We drove for a few more minutes before I realized where we were heading. An old, deserted gas station. Parked in front of the station was his familiar blue BMW. Feeling anxious, I parked a bit farther away and waited. About an hour later, I saw the BMW pull out and leave. Once my nerves had calmed a bit, I drove closer to the gas station. It was completely deserted, shrouded in darkness. I got out of the car and checked the doors, but they were all locked. I couldn't handle my curiosity any longer, so I picked up a rock and smashed one of the windows. Immediately, an alarm blared. Panicking, I sprinted back to my car and sped off, wondering why a gas station that had been abandoned for years would even have a working alarm system. As I drove away, I called 911, gave a vague report, and hung up. The next morning, I hoped it was all over. But when I stepped onto my balcony, I saw about 8 police cars parked in front of my neighbor's house, their lights flashing. I watched as they handcuffed him and led him away. One by one, the police cars left, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. I stood there, lighting up a cigarette, feeling an odd mix of isolation and confusion. Tried asking the police what was going on. They didn't give me any information. Even when I went back to the gas station, the dirt road had been blocked off. Maybe one day I'll gather enough courage to return there, figure out the truth myself. This happened quite a while ago when I was renting a small house in the town where I started my first job. It was a cozy little 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, just enough space for me to live comfortably and occasionally host small get-togethers with friends. I had been living there for a few weeks and everything was going pretty smoothly. The landlady, who I'll call Sophia, was friendly and pleasant. I had the impression she rented to me because she didn't want to rent to men. But strange things started happening just a few weeks after I moved in. One evening, I heard a knock at the door. I stepped over and asked, "Who's there?" There was no response. I didn't open the door because there was no reason anyone should be knocking so late at night. The next morning, as I was getting ready to head to work, I opened the front door and found a large piece of paper stuck to the glass. It said, "Hello, beautiful." Immediately, I recalled the knock from the night before. It had to be the same person. But who would do this? I felt a chill run down my spine as I quickly crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash, hoping it was a one-time thing. That night, however, I heard another knock, this time earlier, while I was making dinner. I walked over to the door, didn't say anything, and just listened. Since there was no window or peephole to look outside, I couldn't see who was there unless I opened the door, which I definitely wasn't going to do. 2 nights of knocking in a row now, I began to worry this could be something more serious. I called my parents to ask for advice. My dad, a former police officer, said that if I called the cops, they likely wouldn't be able to do much unless they caught the person in the act. He told me not to go outside at night and not to open the door for anyone. If it kept happening, he'd come stay with me for a few days. The next morning, I checked the door and found another note stuck to the glass. This time it read, "I like watching you." I felt a deep sense of dread. I immediately snapped a picture of the note and sent it to my family, then texted Sophia. When I asked if she'd ever had any issues with anyone, she seemed genuinely surprised and assured me no one was following her. Still, I didn't feel at ease. I decided to leave a note on the door after work that evening. "If you're looking for Sophia, she doesn't live here. If you keep harassing me, I'll call the police." This gave me some peace of mind, thinking maybe this would put an end to it. That night, I stayed up nervously waiting, but no knock came, and I slept through the night. The next morning, I went to retrieve my note from the door, only to find it wasn't the same note I had left. It was a new one that said, "I'm not looking for Sophia, I'm looking for you." And then my name was written, along with the same phrase from before, "I like watching you." I immediately sent the photo to my dad. Overcome with fear, I felt like I was going to collapse. My dad wasted no time getting in his car and driving straight to me. By the time he arrived, I was at work, but I couldn't focus, my mind racing with thoughts of this terrifying situation. I even began to suspect my coworkers, wondering if it could be someone like the odd guy Mark. My dad and I decided to wait until evening to call the police, hoping the person would show up. We wanted them to see the police had come. An officer was dispatched to take our information. Even though only one officer came, having my dad, an ex-cop, made the situation feel more serious. After the police left, my dad decided to sit on the front porch, keeping watch for hours, even after I had gone to bed. Thankfully, the person didn't return that night. I made the decision to move out of that house as soon as I could. Sophia understood the situation and didn't protest when I decided to leave earlier than planned. Fortunately, the stalker didn't follow me to my new place, which also ruled out the possibility that it was a coworker. Still, I'll probably never know who it was. It was just a regular Thursday afternoon in high school. I was walking down the hallway with my friend Emily, who was chatting away about something I didn't really care much about. I just wanted to get through the day because I had so much going on both at home and school. My foster parents weren't exactly the most pleasant people to live with, to say the least. As we passed by the cafeteria, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. I asked Emily if she wanted to come in, but she said no and would wait outside. I walked into the bathroom and immediately noticed something strange. It was completely empty. That was odd, as this bathroom was always busy, no matter what time of day it was. But I didn't think much of it and headed straight into one of the stalls. A few seconds after I sat down, I heard the bathroom door swing open and then slam shut loudly. It was obvious that someone had come in, but what struck me as odd was that I didn't hear any other sounds. Whoever it was just stood there, not moving. I figured they were probably hiding from a hall monitor or something like that, and didn't give it much more thought. I finished what I was doing, and as I stood up to button my pants, I absent-mindedly looked at the scribbles on the wall. Typical stuff like curse words about teachers or random stupid quotes. Right then, I heard the door open and close again, and I assumed whoever had come in had now left. When I stepped out of the stall, I saw Emily staring at me with a strange look on her face, almost as if she was confused or freaked out. I asked her what was wrong, and she responded, "Who was standing behind you in the stall?" Hearing that, I felt a chill run down my spine. I told her no one was in there with me and asked her to stop messing around. But Emily was dead serious. She swore she wasn't joking. She went on to explain that when she came into the bathroom, just a few seconds before I walked out, she saw someone standing directly behind me in the stall, with their shoes touching the back of my heels. Freaked out, she quickly left the bathroom because she didn't want to see what would happen next. I kept insisting that I was the only one in the stall, but I did remember hearing someone come in, even though I didn't hear them use the bathroom. I initially thought maybe they were hiding from a hall monitor, but Emily made it clear that no one else entered until she did, just seconds before I came out. I'm not someone who usually believes in supernatural stuff. This whole situation made me incredibly uneasy. I found a hall monitor and told them what happened. They tried to reassure me, suggesting maybe Emily was just trying to scare me. But I knew Emily wasn't the type to joke about something like that. When she looked me straight in the eye and described exactly what she had seen, I couldn't shake the feeling that it really happened. There was something in that stall with me. The fact that I had heard the bathroom door open and close twice only added to the unsettling feeling. I'm 21 now, but I still can't forget that experience. My name is Matt, and honestly, I feel lost in life right now. I don't want to get into too many details, but let's just say my family situation is a mess. And for the past 3 years, I've done everything I can to stay away from home as much as possible. My close friends from high school have all changed in ways I can't really connect with. And there's nothing left for me back in my hometown. I'm about to enter my final year of college, but But truthfully, I have no idea what I'm going to do after I graduate. Enough about that. Last year, I spent some time living in Berlin, maybe trying to find some direction or purpose for my life. I still remember the name of the bar I was at that night. It was called Ruya. I was sitting there alone, which wasn't unusual for me. When I was about to leave, I checked my pockets and realized I'd lost my apartment key. Just my luck. Even though I knew the apartment was locked, and there was no way I'd be able to get back in, I stumbled out of the bar and started walking toward home. It was too late to call anyone to get a spare key. I don't know what most people would do in that situation, but my first instinct was to find somewhere to sleep for the night. To make matters worse, it started raining. In the end, I decided to crash under a nearby bridge. I wasn't entirely sure where I was, but at least I was out of the rain and felt a bit safer, relatively speaking. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard faint voices coming from the other side of the river. Sitting up, I saw 5 men standing near the opposite bank by a small boat that was tied up. They didn't seem to notice me. It didn't take long for me to realize I was witnessing some kind of shady deal, probably drugs or something similar. My German wasn't good enough to catch everything they were saying, but the exchange of briefcases and duffel bags made it pretty clear what was going down. I thought about finding a different spot to sleep, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself by moving around. So I stayed quiet and kept still, hoping they'd finish up soon. Suddenly, one of them shouted in German. His voice filled with anger and pulled a gun on another guy. The tension was immediate as the man with the gun aimed it at the other guy, who raised his hands and started talking rapidly, clearly trying to explain something. The rest of the group began rifling through his belongings, and things were escalating fast. At that point, I realized it was too dangerous to stick around, so I slowly got up, prepared to leave. But just as I moved, one of them yelled something along the lines of, "There's someone over there." I didn't think. I just started running as fast as I could. I could hear them shouting behind me, and the only phrase I understood was, "Don't shoot." I kept running, not daring to look back until I was completely out of breath, throwing up, on the verge of collapse. Luckily, they didn't chase after me, but if they had wanted to, they could have easily shot me. Sometimes I think about that night and wonder if I could have lost my life if they had decided to pull the trigger. Other times, I feel like I'm destined to be running from dangers I never see coming for the rest of my life. What I'm about to share is the reason my family decided to leave the house that had been in our family for 3 generations. I struggled with depression for most of my life. A sense of worthlessness always haunted me. Now, things have gotten better. But when I was younger, it was really tough. I spent most of my time alone in my room. Our house was situated deep in the woods, surrounded by trees on 3 sides, and the forest separated our home from the nearest neighbors. My room was larger than the average bedroom, located in the back corner of the house, 2 windows that faced directly into the forest. For a kid like me, it was a pretty scary scene, especially since I had a huge fear of the dark. Strange things started happening when I was about 10 years old. I was in 5th grade at the time, old enough that running to my parents' room after a nightmare wasn't considered acceptable anymore. However, people still thought my imagination was too wild. The first thing I noticed was my nightlight. It could change colors, but I always set it to red each night before I went to sleep. One night, I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, which wasn't something that happened to me often. Even though I was still really tired and fell back asleep right after, I noticed that my nightlight was no longer glowing red like usual. At first, I didn't think much of it, until about a week later. One morning, I woke up again to find my nightlight had changed colors. I asked my parents if they'd messed with my nightlight, but they seemed genuinely confused and had no idea what I was talking about. After explaining it to them, they told me it was probably a glitch with the light, and I accepted that explanation for a little while. Things got more unsettling one morning when I woke up and saw that my nightlight had been unplugged and was lying on the floor. This time, I started to get suspicious, but my parents continued to dismiss my worries. telling me to focus on school. My dad even suggested that I was old enough not to need a nightlight anymore. Just a few days later, my nightlight disappeared completely, as if it had never existed. I was convinced my parents had hidden it, and this made me angry. We had a big argument, with both of them blaming each other and neither admitting to taking the light. After that incident, things seemed normal for about a week. That didn't last. For 3 nights straight, I woke up in the middle of the night, no clear reason. Each time, I couldn't figure out what had woken me. After the 4th time I told my parents about it, they said it was probably just normal changes I was going through during puberty. The next night, I decided not to fall back asleep when I woke up. A few minutes after waking, I heard a faint noise, someone rummaging around in my closet. My parents didn't believe me, and my dad even checked the closet himself. But aside from a few old toys and some posters, there was nothing unusual. The next 4 nights were truly horrifying. Each night, I was woken up by the sound coming from the closet. I couldn't take it anymore and begged my parents to believe me. My dad, frustrated, dragged me to the closet to prove there was nothing there. He started pulling everything out of the closet, all the while scolding me. But then, as he removed one of the posters from the wall, both my parents froze. Behind the poster was a large hole in the wall. My mom screamed in terror, and my dad quickly shone a flashlight into the hole. It was too deep to see the end. He immediately rushed outside to check around the house. When he got to the side of the house, he found a small hole in the ground, and after digging deeper, he discovered a tunnel leading from the woods directly into my bedroom. That night, my mom and I left the house immediately and stayed with my aunt. Not long after, we moved out for good. I stayed with my aunt until we settled into a new place. The experience still sends chills down my spine every time I think about it, but I know I'll have to confront it one day. My parents also avoid bringing up the incident, perhaps because they feel guilty for not believing me. It's chilling to think that someone had been sneaking into my room for an entire month, and I'll never know what they wanted. If your child ever tells you something strange, listen to them. When I was about 16 or 17, skateboarding was everything to me. It was my escape, my passion, and the way I felt truly free. Every weekend, my friends and I would skate until the sun went down. Those were some of the best moments of my youth. Riding through the city streets with the wind in my face, the sound of wheels on the pavement, and the laughter of my friends filling the air. There's one particular weekend night that stands out vividly in my memory. It started like any other. We were downtown, showing off our latest tricks, pushing each other to get better. But as the night wore on, the group started to thin out as everyone headed home one by one. Eventually, I figured it was time for me to go too. It was pretty late, maybe around 10 or 11 p.m. After saying goodbye to my friends, I hopped on the bus that would take me close to home. None of my friends lived near the bus route I was on, so I rode alone, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. The city was still alive, but the night had a way of making everything feel quiet and empty, like the calm before a storm. When I got off at my stop, I found myself on a large street running east to west. The bus stop was about a 2-minute walk from my house, which was on a quieter street running north to south. As I stepped off the bus, the city seemed to fade into silence behind me. I started walking toward home, the only sound being my footsteps on the pavement. The night air was cool, and a light breeze rustled the leaves in the trees along the road. As I approached the intersection connecting the main street to my own, something caught my eye. A figure emerged from a side street near the elementary school close to my house. It was a man on a bike, and he seemed to appear out of the darkness, like the night itself had conjured him. The street he came from led to a path near a creek, a place I knew well. But seeing someone come from there at this hour made me uneasy. My instincts immediately kicked in, telling me something wasn't right. It wasn't unusual to see people out at night, but there was something about this guy that made my stomach tighten with anxiety. He didn't belong there, at least not at this time, and not on that street. Picked up my pace, trying to shake the growing sense of fear, but it clung to me like a shadow. As I walked faster, he started to pedal faster too, and then I heard him yell, "Hey!" His voice echoed down the quiet street, and the sound of it sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a passerby. Something was wrong, and I knew it immediately. My heart began to race, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was close to home, but I didn't want to lead him there. My house was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe, and I didn't want to bring this potential danger anywhere near it. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but my mind was spinning, trying to figure out my next move. He was getting closer. Within moments, he had caught up to me, stopping his bike right in front of the school, blocking my path. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I looked him over. He was much bigger and stronger than I was, easily twice my size. I was a small, skinny kid for my age, and this guy looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s. The age difference only made the situation more intimidating. Why was a grown man following a teenage boy down a dark street at this hour? He asked me where I was going. His voice slightly slurred, making me wonder if he'd been drinking. Something about him just didn't sit right, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I responded with a cocky remark, trying to hide the fear bubbling inside me. I told him it didn't matter where I was going, hoping my attitude would make him back off. But instead of stepping away, he leaned in closer and asked if I wanted to go behind the school and hang out with him. The offer made my heart stop. The thought of being alone with this stranger behind a dark, deserted school filled me with dread. I considered using my skateboard as a weapon, but I wasn't sure it would be enough to defend myself against someone his size. What if I missed? What if I just made him angrier? In desperation, I tried calling 911, but to my shock, the line was busy. Panic surged through me, and I gripped my skateboard tighter, my knuckles turning white. I was running out of options, and my mind was spinning with worst-case scenarios. Could I outrun him? Would anyone hear me if I screamed? I thought about banging on doors and shouting for help, but the houses around me were dark and silent. I felt completely alone, trapped in this nightmare with no way out. As I frantically scanned the street for any sign of help, I spotted an elderly woman walking on the other side of the street, about 20 meters away. She was like a beacon of hope in the darkness, and without thinking, I bolted toward her, shouting for help. The man on the bike followed me, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to reach that woman, and I needed to reach her fast. When I got to her, I desperately begged for help, my voice trembling with fear. But to my dismay, she seemed frightened, clearly alarmed by the sudden approach of two strangers in the middle of the night. She told me to stay away, but I couldn't just walk off. Noticing her accent, I took a chance and asked if she spoke Polish, a language I had learned from my family. When she said yes, it felt like a lifeline. I quickly explained the situation to her in Polish, my words tumbling out in a rush. The moment she understood what was happening, her demeanor changed. She softened, and for the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. The woman urged me to try calling 911 again, and I told her about the busy line earlier. She insisted that I give it another try, and as I reached for my phone, I noticed the man on the bike had backed off. He muttered something under his breath, then turned and pedaled away into the darkness. My heart was still pounding, but the immediate danger had passed. I finally got through to 911 and reported the incident. They assured me that officers would be dispatched to search the area, but when they called back later, they said they hadn't found anyone matching my description. The man had vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. That night was the most terrifying experience of my life. If that woman hadn't been there, I don't know what might have happened. I'm incredibly grateful to her and thankful that nothing worse occurred. It was a real turning point for me in how I view personal safety. Before that night, I had never really thought about how vulnerable I could be, but the incident opened my eyes to the dangers that can exist, even in familiar places.